Welcome back to the Talking Hedge. I'm Josh Kincaid, and this is your Cannabis Business Podcast. Today, we're going to cover a historic vote yesterday when the House passed the Safe Banking Act. What the implications are, what does that mean? It means a lot. For example, just the sheer fact of being able to not have the deal in cash is going to be able to free up a lot of human capital and resources. Not only that, companies are going to be able to automate, expand, scale up, go interstate, international. Things are going to get crazy. So we're going to dive into this article from MJ Business Daily. Quote, in a landmark move, U.S. House lawmakers on Wednesday approved overwhelmingly by 321 to 103 vote legislation that would pave the way for financial institutions and insurance companies to serve state legal marijuana businesses without fear of federal reprisal, end quote. The article goes on to say that although it's a historic step, it's not expected to substantially change cannabis businesses' financial situations until the Republican-controlled Senate follows suit. But there's a lot of support from the Bankers Association. So the article goes on to say that, quote, a number of banking organizations, most notably the American Bankers Association, or the ABA, have been in strong support of cannabis banking reform. But the ABA also has been clear that explicit protection and guidance is needed from the federal banking regulators so financial institutions don't run into risk of being punished under federal laws, such as money laundering statutes. According to the managing director of the Cannabis ETF, quote, the cannabis banking reform, if it passed both congressional chambers, would represent a transformational event for the industry in terms of expanding access to much needed capital. However, from what he's seeing, full-blown capital markets access may have to wait for passage of a more comprehensive legislation. So the vote marks the first time that a standalone marijuana bill has come before the full House, and also marks the culmination of a 6-year effort by the cannabis industry that has long pushed for cannabis banking reform. So the idea behind this whole bill is that it's supposed to alleviate some of the financial burdens that a lot of businesses have with banking. In fact, the IRS is having issues right now, inundated with cash, and how to take that cash and count it and be accountable, safe, and how to process all of that. So this is a decent step towards allowing other companies to acquire property, plant, and equipment, as well as you're seeing a lot of startups buy startups. We're going to dive into that next week. But you're going to see some operations and expansion. It's going to be easier for multi-state operators to create a real estate investment trust, get that loan that they need, and kind of move on and scale up. So it's going to be interesting to see just the push and drive from this alone, if people are going to kind of just jump ahead of the game and speculate that it will eventually be passed in the Senate. Time will tell. But the top three advantages that industry officials are citing for the passing of the cannabis banking reform is to reduce the cash motive crimes, improve the financial transparency of the cannabis industry, and increase the efficiency of tax collections. It seriously is one of the craziest countries in the world in terms of tax collections. You're supposed to know what your tax dollar amount is, and instead of the government giving you a dollar amount that you owe, you're supposed to estimate. But then if you're wrong, they're going to tell you exactly how much and then penalize you for it. So all of this is going to at least help to become more normal crazy instead of extra crazy. Ultimately, there's a diversity issue. There's a lot of push for social equity programs. And so we're writing a bill in Washington State right now. I say we, that's the Cannabis Alliance in Washington State. It's a lobbyist group, and I'm the chair of a committee for the Marijuana Lounge, as it's called here. There's a felony on maintaining and operating marijuana lounge. And so there's a lot of headway, with impaired driving or just smoking indoors, and just the whole lobbying aspect behind it is difficult. There's not a lot of opportunities to generate revenue even inside with advertising. We covered that yesterday. But ultimately, the state wants three things. They want a social equity program, access for medical patients, and advantages for small business. But this article from MJ Business Daily goes on to say that there's some diversity issues with some civil rights groups wanting Congress to address a comprehensive reform for social justice provisions first, rather than cannabis banking, which is seen mostly an issue benefiting the cannabis industry. An executive director of the Marijuana Policy Project was quoted as saying that denying access to banking is making it harder to increase the diversity of the cannabis industry. Having been a banker and underwritten thousands of SBA, the Small Business Association loans, I can tell you that minorities being accepted by the federal government in general is really, really low. Just entrepreneurs in general don't get approved. And then minority programs that I've seen personally, the tens of thousands over the 6 years that I was a banker, I didn't really see any get approved. The SBA is very, very strict. And hopefully, this social equity program will give some advantages. We've seen in Illinois, looking at their bill, that they have a couple of requirements to be accepted into the social equity program. You need to meet minority requirements. You need to have $750,000 or less in revenue in the previous year. You need to be with the company for 5 years, which is a lifetime in this industry. But it is kind of an ability to get in, get a license. And then if you leave and have to pay those fees with interest back, it's probably better with first mover advantages. So definitely a strategy, if nothing else. Benzinga has an article that says House approves the Safe Banking Act. We cannot afford to wait any longer. So why does it matter? Well, due to the cannabis being listed as a Schedule I drug by the DEA, the majority of legal cannabis businesses encounter difficulties obtaining basic banking services from banks and credit unions. Financial institutions are forced to deny services to cannabis business due to fear of prosecution from the federal government. As a result, most cannabis businesses are forced to deal entirely in cash, which poses a major security hazard and operational nightmare. Everyday operations like accepting credit card payments, making payroll, tax payments by check, or conducting wire transfers are simply not possible for American cannabis businesses today. The article goes on to say that banks and financial institutions would be in the clear to take business from cannabis companies that comply with state regulations and would protect banks from punishment under federal banking regulations. It would also protect ancillary businesses, companies that don't work directly with the plant, from being charged with money laundering schemes. So now the Safe Banking Act is on its way to the Senate, where there's a Republican majority Senate, and they'll decide whether or not this legislation makes its way to Trump's desk before the 2020 election. They may stall the vote, but in my opinion, they're going to look at the dollars. Of course, that's my opinion, where the Talking Hedge looks through the lens of finance. It's all about money. So if you follow the money, you're going to see that they're going to look at the overall economy. The repo market is adding $60 to $70 billion a day. The federal government's paying that, when the repo market is supposed to be between banks only, and only supposed to be overnight, where everything's settled. But if you've been paying attention, a week ago, that broke. That whole system collapsed. Banking is not able to find enough dollars to cover their own requirements, having to borrow money from the federal government to the tune of $60 to $70 billion per day. And that keeps stacking up. So we're close to $500 billion at this point. So Trump is going to be looking at additional ways to generate business and revenue. I have no doubt that cannabis is going to be the savior, if you will. We've done topics on sin stocks and how they have an inverse relationship during economic correction. And what they're looking through, the government is looking at, is eventually a correction in some housing and some layoffs. And what that means is less revenue. So this is really all about money. I expect it just to be a matter of time. So stay tuned. With that, we're going to roll this one up. I'm Josh Kincaid. This is the Talking Hedge. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, or don't, and I'm out.